Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From an analysis section, which holds a paramount importance for the upcoming mains examination of 2026. In the first topic, we'll try to analyze what do we mean by the United Nations Security Council and why the reforms in United Nations Security Council has become the need of the hour. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to analyze the hydropower potential of our country and how we are lagging behind China and what are the causes. Then, we'll also add a means value addition section where we will discuss about the criminalization of politics, which will be ultimately followed by the prelims pointer where we'll try to simplify the news for you and also provide you the much important value addition. So, stay tuned. Where an article written by the member of National Security Advisor Board and UN International Law Commission actually puts strong arguments for our country's inclusion as permanent member at United Nations Security Council. What is this United Nations Security Council? How it actually came into being? What is this idea of being a permanent member at United Nations Security Council? And what is this veto power associated with this UNSC which you keep on hearing about? These are going to be the fundamentals of our discussion in this particular topic today, which we are going to do from the aspect of GS2 paper under the larger theme of international relations and important international organization. So keep this in mind that United Nations Security Council is one of the 6 principal organs of United Nations. United Nations, which basically act as the world's largest government organization, currently comprising of 193 member states. And United Nations actually came into the being in the year of 1945 in the aftermath of the events of World War II. Now, when we are discussing about the United Nations, it actually was created for 2 important core objectives. First was to actually maintain international peace, and the second was to ensure the security and the sovereignty of the nation. Very recently, this particular 2 core objectives were very vividly depicted by the unilateral attack which took place on Venezuela by USA, where USA basically ended up capturing the oil reserves of Venezuela, or in the recently culminated Iran-Israel war. The Iran-Israel war, which actually culminated with Treaty of Versailles. Now, very interestingly, it was this Treaty of Versailles signed back in the year of 1919, which also actually marked the end of World War I. The World War I, which has gained the epithet over a time of the war to end all the wars. World War I, which had a devastating impact on human life and economy, for example, leading to 15 to 20 million people perishing during the World War I. From India's context, keep this in mind, that approximately 74,817 Indian soldiers actually sacrificed their life fighting for their colonial masters, out of which the name of 13,313 soldiers has been listed on India Gate, which basically acts as a memorial for the soldiers who sacrificed their life for the British power at that point of a time. So after the World War I ended, the idea was through the Treaty of Versailles to create such an international organization with the same 2 core objectives, that is to maintain international peace and security. And thus you can say the erstwhile father or the precursor of United Nations, that was League of Nations, was created through Treaty of Versailles 1990. With the same idea, to maintain international peace, security, to prevent the sovereignty of the countries. However, this League of Nations remained a league of notion itself, or just a paper tiger, because it faced several shortcomings. Like for example, it did not had its own independent army to actually sanction any kind of military action against a nation or 2 varying nations at that point of a time. Or it was largely financially dependent on the big powers of that point of a time like Britain, France, etc. Keep this in mind that in fact, many of the big powers like for example USA never formally joined this League of Nations itself. Thus, facing these shortcomings, it was entirely dysfunctional to kind of curb down any kind of unilateral actions which were being taken by the nations at that point of a time. For example, the Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931, or for example, Italy's invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. Ultimately, the final nail in the coffin to this noble idea of having an international organization which curbed down any kind of unilateral action, which maintained peace and security among the nation, the final nail in the coffin to this particular noble idea was provided by the invasion of Nazi's Germany led by Hitler, the invasion of Poland which took place on 1st of September 1939, which ultimately had a domino effect and led to the World War II. So during the World War II also, these big allied powers like Belgium, France, Britain, they were actually formulating an idea to create such an international organization which will ultimately try to maintain the global peace and tranquility. First and foremost, it reflected in the Atlantic Charter of 1941, which was eventually signed between UK's then Prime Minister, right, Winston Churchill, and USA's President Roosevelt. So Churchill and Roosevelt basically signed on this Atlantic Charter, which first and foremost made a promise to the colonies. They said that please help us in this time of despair, and we promise, I shapath, that once the war ends, you people will have right to self-determination. So the colonies were given a choice, right, will be given a choice after the war, that whether you want to remain a colony, or do you want to function as a dominant status under a big power, or do you want to become independent, and also to create an organization which ensures global cooperation for better socio-economic conditions for the future. Then a question shall come in your mind, that how these big four or big five nations at that point of a time who were participating in the war as allied powers, US, UK, USSR, Russia, China, how they ultimately took this epithet of United Nations. That they did for the first time in London Declaration of 1942. So through the London Declaration, these big four states of that point of a time, US, UK, USSR and China, they basically condemned the kind of the extermination of Jews which was taking place through the Nazis' Holocaust, and termed themselves as United Nations, the nations which have united to preserve any such violation of human rights. Ultimately, in the Oaks Conference, which took place in Washington, D.C. in 1944, France also joined these big four states, and thus the creation of big five states were taken place. These big five states, kind of emerging as the victorious states during the World War II, they basically put a self-proclaimed responsibility on their shoulder. They said, we will try to prevent any such global scale conflict in the future. We will try to prevent freedom of trade and prosperity. And we will try to prevent any human right violation which will take place in any country whatsoever. And thus, to actually this kind of a self-responsibility which has taken by these people, they themselves provided them certain powers in Yalta Conference of 1945. Where they said that whenever such a body of United Nations will take place, there will exist a specific Security Council which will have a single point agenda to maintain international peace and security. That particular body will have 15 members in total. 5 of them will be permanent, and these are those victorious states after the World War II, USA, UK, USSR or now Russia, China and France. And these states will have certain special power to actually ensure this international peace and security. Like for example, they can actually veto any decision which has been taken by the council. Keep this in mind, that why India keep on pushing for our permanent inclusion in this council, because United Nations Security Council is the only United Nations body which has authority to pass binding resolution on any particular country. Also, United Nations Security Council has a major responsibility to maintain peace and security, for which purpose it can also enact any kind of economic sanction or put arms embargo on any country, also put any kind of travel ban as well. So these are certain special power associated with United Nations Security Council, which has 15 members. 5 of them, the big 5 powers after the World War II, they basically act as a kind of a permanent member. What are the other 5 organizations? One is United Nations General Assembly, which actually is the main policy making and representative body, currently having 193 member states. Also Economic and Social Council, which actually kind of enhances the coordination and policy review and any kind of economic and environmental issue, such as for example the impending disaster of climate change. Then there exists Trusteeship Council, which provides international supervision for 11 trust territories under 7 states. Like for example, earlier the state of Palestine was actually created as a kind of a protected state between the protection of the states of Britain and France. There exists a UN Secretariat, which is actually led by Secretary General and the staff member who carry out the day-to-day work which is actually mandated by the United Nations General Assembly. Keep this in mind that out of these 6 principal organs, all of these 5 which we have discussed till now, all of them are basically located where? In the New York. There is only one principal organ of United Nations which is actually located outside the New York at Hague, Netherlands, and that is International Court of Justice, which deals with to resolve the disputes among the member states. Once we have understood this idea and the special power of the permanent members of United Nations Security Council, now let's try to assess what are these non-permanent members. The 10 non-permanent members, they are actually elected by the United Nations General Assembly. So let's say for example, India wants to become a member of this particular United Nations Security Council. Can we become a permanent member? Obviously not. We are not the part of the big 5. So we can only become a non-permanent member. So to become that, we basically require 2/3 of all the votes which has been cast on that particular day of election at UNGA. Let's say all 193 member vote. So we basically require 123 votes to be elected as one of the 10 non-permanent member in the United Nations Security Council. Now let's say for example, when the voting was taking place, there were 2 candidates, India and Pakistan. There is an equal amount of votes which has been actually put for both the countries. Like for example, how it happened in the year of 1979. So a tie has occurred. The tie occurred in that particular year between Cuba and Colombia. So both of them actually had to withdraw, and then Mexico was actually elected as a kind of a compromise candidate. Same thing actually repeated for one more time in 2016, where Italy and Netherlands, instead of withdrawing their nomination, they basically decided to serve for 1-year term each. So basically, what is the term if country actually gets elected as a non-permanent member in United Nations Security Council? The term is 2 years, is starting from the date of 1st of January. So for example, our country, for the last time when we were part of the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member, that was from 1st of January 2021 to 31st of December 2023. This was basically our 8th term which we were serving. Now let's say after serving this, can we actually kind of file our nomination for another election? The answer is no. So a retiring member is not eligible for immediate re-election. So we are not eligible for 24 to 2026 cycle. So thus we will again nominate ourselves for 2027. Remember that 5 members are replaced every single year. So it is chapter 5, article 23 to 32, which basically deals with these permanent and non-permanent member state. So there are total number of 15 seats. 3 of them has been reserved from African state. All of them can only become a non-permanent member. So the entire African continent, does it has any permanent representation in United Nations Security Council? The answer is no. Keep this in mind. Second, Asia Pacific states, again 3 seats. 1 of them is reserved for China. There is India also, having much more populous state than China, having one of the largest economies of the world. Do we have permanent representation? Answer is again no. Then 2 seats are reserved for Eastern European state. 1 is permanently reserved for Russia. Latin America and Caribbean state, do they have any permanent representation? The answer is no. Ultimately, 5 seats are reserved for Western European and other states. 3 of them is already permanent seats taken by France, UK and USA. So for all the rest of Europe, there only remains 2 seats to be elected for. So when we have understood the entire structure, can you see the default in this structure itself, having no permanent representation or any seat in the permanent 5 members, not for the entire continent of Africa and not entirely for any Latin American and Caribbean states. Okay? So again, when we are saying that India wants to be the part of the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member, and for that purpose we are launching various international initiatives and gathering various level of international support. What are the important functions of United Nations Security Council? First and foremost, we have already discussed the only UN body to actually have the power to pass legally binding resolution. Second, it can also direct any country, or let's say for example the member state, to launch a kind of a collective military action against any state. That is also the power with the United Nations Security Council and with the permanent 5 member. Now let's try to understand this, the important functions. Like for example, the chapter 6, article 33 to 38. It basically empowers the United Nations Security Council to act as a mediator in any kind of international dispute. Does India is a member of United Nations Security Council right now? The answer is no. Does India has now the power to mediate between Israel and Iran war which was taking place recently? Absolutely not. So many of the people were like that, why Modi ji is not going to mediate? Why Modi ji is not going to mediate? Because we have to follow some international procedures and legal mechanisms also. Then this particular United Nations Security Council can actually seek solution between two varying states through mediation, negotiation and arbitration as well. So for example, let's say it actually was visible during the Suez crisis of 1956, when the president of Egypt at that point of a time, he ended up nationalizing the Suez Canal. So at that point of a time, the economies of Britain and France realized that if Suez Canal gets nationalized, they actually end up losing their control on a very important strait, which basically connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Arabian Sea, and through which their entire oil used to be imported. Thus, your Britain, France, Israel, they basically launched a war on Egypt. But Egypt at that point of a time was supported by USSR and USA, which basically wanted the Suez Canal to be opened for the trade for all the countries. Thus, they basically passed a resolution in the United Nations Security Council against these states. Thus, now Britain and France are required to stop the war. But they did not. Why? Because remember, Britain and France is also the part of permanent 5 members. Thus, they have the power to veto any resolution, even by the other permanent member as well. Ultimately, USA had to put certain economic sanctions on Britain and France to basically force them to withdraw. USSR was much more direct in their approach. They basically called Britain and France. They were like, we have some nuclear weapons and we are desperate enough to try that. Do you want to be a testing ground? Second, chapter 7. It basically provides United Nations Security Council to have the power to put enforceable action to determine any threat to the existence of peace, also impose sanction or authorize military forces. Like for example, a resolution which was passed by United Nations Security Council in the year of 1990, where it basically asked the member state to launch a collective military action against Iraq. Iraq, which had actually unilaterally invaded Kuwait at that point of a time. So the power was given to the member state by the United Nations Security Council that they can actually attack Iraq, right, without violating any international treaty or something, and actually to prevent the sovereignty of Kuwait. Chapter 8, Article 52 to 54 actually provides for peace settlement of any kind of local disputes which are taking place through regional organizations, like for example NATO, African Union or Arab League. Resolution of 1674 actually kind of provides a responsibility on the shoulder of United Nations Security Council to protect population from genocide, war crime, ethnic cleansing and any crime against humanity. So can United Nations Security Council can directly intervene in this Rohingya refugee crisis which is taking place in Myanmar, or the ethnic cleansing of Rohingyas? The answer is absolutely yes. Is India part of United Nations Security Council right now? No. Can we pass such resolution at United Nations Security Council? The answer is absolutely not. Can we pass a binding resolution at any given point of time even if we are member? No. Why? Because we are not a permanent member. Is this clear to you? How does this voting work whenever it comes to passing of any given resolution? So Article 27 of the Charter provides that affirmative vote of 60% of member is required for the passing of any resolution. So for example, when USA and USSR would have passed a resolution against Britain and France during the Suez crisis, how many votes they had required? 9 of them. If any member of United Nations Security Council is abstaining themselves, it will not be regarded as a veto, though all the 5 permanent members must vote for adopting any amendment of UN Charter. Very important provision, keep this in mind. So for example, if India wants to become a member of the P5 countries to have a veto power or to have the power to pass any binding resolution, then all the 5 countries of permanent 5 members shall agree. So even if China keeps on vetoing any such resolution which actually kind of provides for India's inclusion in the as a permanent member in the United Nations Security Council, then that particular resolution will stay and India will not be included. However, if India wants to discuss about, let's say, the issue of Jammu and Kashmir at United Nations, can such discussion, right, or resolution, can be vetoed by these countries? No. So the procedural matters cannot be vetoed, but any resolution can be vetoed. Keep this in your mind. Yahan tak clear hai? So let's have a quick look at our journeys at United Nations Security Council. First and foremost, we have served as a non-permanent member of United Nations Security Council for a record number of 8 times. The last term was 21-23, and keep this in mind that for the first time we were the part of United Nations Security Council from 50 to 51. In 1953, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit was actually elected as the first woman president of UNGA. Also, since our inclusion in the United Nations Security Council, we have always tried to act as a voice of Global South, where instead of just functioning for our own parochial interest, we have always tried to bring the interest of the underdeveloped nations, the Global South, at the international platform, at the international forefront. Like for example, as a part of non-aligned movement, which we launched at that point of a time as a kind of a counter thesis to the ideas of capitalism and socialism, which had divided the world into 2 parts. We actually supported Egypt during the Suez crisis of 1956. Then we did not only supported Bangladesh in their liberation war, but also advocated for Bangladesh recognition and inclusion in the United Nations in year of 1971. Then we had also been a very strong voice against apartheid, and that is very recently was visible when our Prime Minister visited Namibia, and their president actually kind of applauded our country's efforts for independence of Namibia from South Africa in the year of 1990. So these are the achievements of Indians when it comes to the United Nations Security Council and its member. But are we a permanent member? No. Do we have the power to veto any resolution against us? Absolutely not. For that, we are dependent on our allied nations like UK and Russia, as we keep on discussing. Do we have a power to pass a binding resolution on any other country? The answer is absolutely not. That's why India keeps on asking for reforms in United Nations Security Council, because there exist certain loopholes. First and foremost, failure in dealing with the major crisis. Major crisis, like for example, from where we started our lecture from as well. USA is a permanent member, has the power to kind of unilaterally go and abduct the president of Venezuela, or to kind of indirectly regulate the mass oil reserves of Venezuela, which has the largest global oil reserves. Keep this in mind. So when we are saying that, can United Nations have any power, any teeth whatsoever to pass binding sanctions on USA to withdraw? The answer is no. And that shows the failure in dealing with major crises, like for example the ethnic genocide in Rwanda, or for example USA's invasion of Iraq which took place. Just look here, the world's refugee crisis which is brewing in Myanmar of Rohingya, in Afghanistan, in Sudan and South Sudan, or for example in Venezuela also. Has United Nations Security Council has been able to curb down any of this? No. Are they sticking to their original 2 core objectives of maintaining international peace and security? The answer is no. Policy blindness towards emerging issues like for example climate change, refugee problem. You guys can very oftenly see when these conference of parties take place. As per a prediction by the World Meteorological Department itself, these countries who are historically responsible for this large scale carbon dioxide emission, they are actually financially liable to the developing nations, right, to provide them funds for transitioning to the green energy. Are they providing any such finances? Just look here. Aid to the small islands actually declines even as the climate change intensifies. Are they effectively dealing with this refugee issue? The answer is no. In fact, this 5 permanent members actually represents the entirely outdated representation of global order, where they act nothing but as a kind of those 5 elder people which we have in our family, who are still trying to regulate each and every family decision even though their ideas has become obsolete. They no longer represents the world. So when this United Nations was created in the year of 1955, the total member were 51. The total UNSC seat was 11 and 5 of them were permanent member, and at that point of a time it was easily understandable. They were economically strong, militarily strong, and thus they could have acted as a kind of guiding nations to other countries, other developing nations. By 1965, the membership of United Nations increased to 180, but the seat has remained till 15 only, and those 5 permanent members have actually kind of tried to secure their seats without any reform. Same goes for even today. Even though the membership has reached to 193, the total number of people at United Nations Security Council remain at 15 nations. The 5 permanent member states still remain the same. Don't you think they basically represents what? Nothing but a microscopic power minority. Where, let's say for example, India has a much larger economy than UK and France. Even though we are not represented as a permanent member at UNSC. We have the world's largest population. So almost 1/6 of the global population do not have a permanent seat at an international organization to maintain peace and security. Then the various repeated misuse and sanctions of veto power. The recent case of USA in the context of Venezuela, or for example, when Russia unilaterally attacked Ukraine, many of the permanent members actually tried to pass binding resolution against Russia to stop this war. Russia, being a permanent member, entirely vetoed it. So because of this dysfunctionality which is associated with the United Nations, just like the League of Nations, the decision making is now actually shifting to the regional groupings, where countries have started focusing much more upon regional groupings like, for example, SAARC, BRICS, SCO, etc. And thus the relevance of United Nations to actually secure or prevent such global peace and security is actually rapidly declining. That's why India actually put a strong rationale for reform. A council which is more reflective of the contemporary geopolitical realities. A much more representative council with much more democratic elements by incorporating inclusive and participatory decision making. A council with a membership that actually includes regional powers will be much more capable. And this is our official stand at United Nations Security Council resolutions and debates which takes place. So this is basically the advocacy for the India's inclusion, which is also reflected in the today's editorial, where it says that how India holds the world's largest population, how we have become the world's largest democracy and the 4th largest economy. How with the initiatives like, for example, Vaccine Matri initiative or inclusion of African Union in G20, right, during our presidency in 2023, how we have actually emerged as the voice of Global South, where we are actually fostering multilateral platforms for global engagement on key issues. The AI Impact Summit, the recent one, can be the example of this, right? Or for example, the International Solar Alliance which we have launched to actually kind of embark upon the sector of renewable energy. How we have always worked on the idea of the whole earth is one family, or Vasudev Kutumbakam as enlisted in Maha Upanishad, where, keep this in mind, India has never shown unilateral aggression against any country till now. Also, we have done an immense contribution to the humanitarian aid and various UN peacekeeping missions. However, there are certain countries who holds apprehension against us. There are thorns in roses as well, where the polarization of the world is taking place with the emerging Sino-Russia nexus. And when this emerging ties with the Russia and China, the Western world, led by US, UK, France, they are actually becoming apprehensive of which side our country is going to choose. And if we become a permanent member, then what if there is an emerging bloc or ties between Russia, China and India? The entire global power can actually shift towards east. That's why many European countries also basically term India as a laundromat country. The country which is still buying a huge chunk of our oil supply or our oil import needs from Russia. Russia is using that particular money to actually buy more weapons and thus fight Ukraine, terming our country as a laundromat country. Then there also exists vehement opposition by China, being a permanent member unless and until it do not stop vetoing any such resolution. Taking our country as a permanent member, we will not be included for sure. And there exist conflicting models of reform as well, as the G4 grouping led by India versus Coffee Club, which is led by the opposition countries, as you guys can see here. G4 is the group of 4, which basically consists of countries who are aspiring, like how you are aspiring to become a future bureaucrat, countries who are aspiring to become a permanent member of United Nations Security Council, like Brazil, Germany, India and Japan. Where we say that, see, the non-permanent seat shall be 14 or 15. So actually add 4 or 5 more seats, right? 4 plus 4 or plus 5. So increase the non-permanent seats from 10 to at least 14 or 15. Take it. 4, 5 for Africa, at least Asia Pacific 1, Eastern Europe 1, Latin America as well. The new permanent members shall not exercise the veto right for at least 15 years. Take it. We will hold off, have a cooling off period, but then at least include us. Then there are countries like, for example, Uniting for Consensus or, for example, Coffee Club, who actually oppose the idea as well. Keep this in mind that even on the veto power, these various groupings actually have different interpretation that also act as a kind of an impediment. So, for example, as per African Union, the veto should be abolished altogether. But so long as it exists, it should be extended to all the members, including the new permanent member. Then the Uniting for Consensus, they are actually ready to consider the formula on how to best limit the use of veto power and binding resolutions. So while conclusion also try to bring these varying traditions and interpretations of veto power among the various groupings which has emerged, making the issue obviously much more complex. Attempt this question and we move forward to the next news. So as the Ministry of Environment has actually provided clearance for a new hydropower project, that is Kirthai 2 Hydel project on the river Chenab, in the wake of the suspension of Indus Water Treaty 1960, which has taken place between India and Pakistan, the Indian government is now trying to speed up the hydropower projects in the upper Himalayan belt. But the question still looms. Are such hydropower projects sustainable for the fragile Himalayan ecosystem? That is something which we'll try to assess in this particular topic in the context of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of renewable energy sector. So first and foremost, we'll try to take the help of a recently published report in the newspaper. The report is 2026 Global Hydropower Outlook by the International Hydropower Association. It basically provides us some very important data about the recent addition of hydropower among the countries, as well as how the China is actually leading the hydropower in the entire world. So keep this in mind that when our country got independent, the idea of our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was to actually provide huge scale capital expenditure to create such large scale energy projects, like for example to actually create large scale dams in our country. And he basically termed these large-scale dams as the temples of future for our country, because they are going to play such an immense role in our economic growth. So for example, India actually launched 2 large-scale mega power dams. One was Hirakud in 1957 and one was Bhakra Nangal in the year of 1963. In response to that, China also launched a large-scale hydropower project that was Sanmenxia in the year of 1963. However, keep this in mind that while Hirakud and Bhakra Nangal were immensely successful, the Sanmenxia Dam of China actually faced a large-scale sedimentation problem and ultimately became dysfunctional. However, from the 1990 onwards, instead of creation of more of such large-scale hydropower dams, India started focusing on rainwater harvesting and check dams, small dams, while China actually put a large-scale investment in creation of such big dams to actually harness the hydropower. Just look at the year of 2000. How the total installed hydropower capacity in our country was 21 gigawatt and China was at 77 gigawatt. Even at that point of time, they were almost 3 times ahead of us. But now look at the large scale difference which has occurred in the year of 2025. So our current hydropower installed power capacity is 57 gigawatt. In the span of 25 years, we have been able to increase our hydropower by 2.5 times. Seems very good on the paper. However, China has actually increased it by almost 6 to 7 times, taking it to 436 gigawatt installed hydropower capacity by the year of 2025. As per this report of Global Hydropower Outlook, 40% of the worldwide hydropower capacity addition in 2025 came from a single country, and that was China. And China has more 300 gigawatt of hydropower projects under construction. 218 of them will actually come from pumped storage. Also, China is going to dominate hydropower in the future by another new project which they have launched, that is Yarlung Zangpo River Hydropower Project. Now look at the map very carefully here. This is your Yarlung Zangbo or Yarlung Tsangpo River, on which China has created this Zangmu Dam here already. This river basically flows and enters into our country as a Siang River, right? And ultimately this Siang River flows and joins your Brahmaputra River. Keep this in mind. China is already creating large-scale dam on the upper stream of the river, thus trying to harness its major hydropower potential. This Medoc project proposed by the China can actually end up generating 60 gigawatt of electricity, which will be 3 times higher than the current largest hydropower project in the world, that is Three Gorges Dam, which is the world's biggest. In response, our country has also launched this Siang River Dam project, where we are saying that okay, they are going to harness how much? 60 gigawatt of power. We are going to harness 11 gigawatt of power from this Siang Dam River project. Okay? Keep this in mind that India is targeting 100 gigawatt of pumped storage hydropower capacity by the year of 2536, but it is nowhere near what China is pursuing. Because we are going to reach to 100 gigawatt of potential by 2035. China is going to reach at that point of time more than 700 gigawatt of energy production only by the hydropower. This is the status of installed capacity currently for our country. That is 57 gigawatt as per the PIB report of date December 2025. In the year of 24 to 25, in an entire year, we added 800 megawatt of hydropower capacity. This hydropower generation share in the total renewable energy generation in our country is currently around 40%. And share in the total power generation, if we include coal and fossil fuel also, that is approximately 8.76%. In this context, this Siang project in Arunachal Pradesh holds of paramount importance because the government of Arunachal Pradesh, in collaboration with the central government, is actually putting huge, large-scale capital infrastructure investment when it comes to hydropower, where the government of Arunachal Pradesh has actually launched a decade of hydropower between 25 to 2035. Idea is to generate approximately 58 gigawatt of hydropower by 2035. So it will actually immensely help us to achieve the idea of 100 gigawatt of pumped storage hydropower potential. Second, to actually use of mega, large and small hydroelectric plants network. Idea is that at least from this power generation, the state will be able to provide let's say 100% power supply is there, 12% free power will actually be generated for the people. 1% of this power generation will also be gone. Whatever the revenue which will be earned for that will actually go for the local area development fund. And it will actually help the government of Arunachal to have an annual revenue of more than 45,000 crore rupees. This is the current renewable energy capacity in India. You can look at the share of hydropower, wind power, small hydropower and solar power, which obviously dominates the renewable energy sector in our country. Now, before we try to understand the issues which prevails with large-scale hydropower installation in our country, let's first try to understand what is these two kinds of hydropower projects which you keep on hearing about. One is pumped storage hydropower, one is run-off river scheme. First and foremost, what is pumped storage hydropower? Now we will go stepwise. This particular information has been provided to us by the Tata company itself. So the first step is, let's say for example, we have installed solar panels or wind turbines. From that, we basically generate some excess energy generated through this solar or wind power, and this renewable energy will be used to actually power the pump. What this pump actually does, it basically start extracting the water which is actually stored in a lower reservoir. So let's say for example there is a lower reservoir from where we have actually kind of diverted a little bit of water from the original flow of the river which is coming from the glacier. From there we basically start diverting the water through the use of this pump. So during the time of low electricity demand, let's say for example in the month of November and December, when we are not using air condition, fans, refrigerator that much, we actually use this excess electricity is used to pump water from a lower reservoir to an upper reservoir. So we basically put the water which was stored here in lower reservoir to upper reservoir. The water stays in upper reservoir and thus kind of storing potential energy until it is needed. So in the time, so upper reservoir, we have basically transferred the water from the lower reservoir to the upper reservoir. Now we are storing the water here. Now let's say the month of March and April comes, large scale global warming, huge requirement of refrigeration. What we will do? We will start flowing the water downhill from the upper stream to the lower stream. When electricity demand is high, the stored water is released from the upper reservoir, flowing back down the lower reservoir, and at this stage, it starts basically kind of moving the turbines, leading to what? Generation of electricity. This is how the pumped storage hydropower works, functioning on a very simple concept of potential energy to kinetic energy. We utilize that energy to, kind of movement of the turbine which generates the electricity and we use it. Ye clear? Second is the run of the river scheme. Here what we do. So let's say for example, this is the natural flow of water and this river can be, let's say for example, any Himalayan river. Ganga, Yamuna, Brahmaputra, or for example in this case Chenab or Siang, right? It is coming. What we do, we put a river diversion here. Here we basically kind of divert the river water to a particular conveyance line. Here we have a surge tank which is actually created at some height. From this surge tank we basically release this water to this powerhouse, where we use the movement of this water again from converting it from potential to kinetic energy to move the turbine. The turbine basically passes the energy to a substation. But don't you think that because there is a diversion of river water which is taking place here, there will take place a kind of a disruption of the ecological flow here? What about the natural species which are found in this river? Let's say if it is a Ganga river. What about, let's say, Gangetic river dolphin which is found here? Don't you think their population can get impacted because of this diversion of flow? One more thing, try to understand. Let's say for example when a river is flowing, so it has a certain velocity. If you actually disrupt that ecological flow towards the downstream, the flow of the river is actually going to significantly decline. Because of that, the river will actually start kind of accumulating a huge amount of sediment in its lower course, and thus it will actually start either kind of dilating from its original stream, or for example the large scale sedimentation will significantly impact the ecological flow of the river as well. Can you see the issues which prevails here itself? Or for example, if we are actually storing this reservoir, let's say here is a glacier. Now with the global warming, the glacier will start melting. Clear? Because the glacier has started melting, the glacier can also lead to excessive flow of water in this lower reservoir. The lower reservoir was basically held by, let's say, some kind of concrete wall. This concrete wall can be entirely washed away. That will lead to what? Glacial lake outburst flood can take place. Such small lakes which exist at the kind of the foothill of such glaciers are basically called as moraines. You people can note down. So this moraine dam failures can lead to what? Glacier lake outburst flood, as it took place in Chamoli disaster of 2013, the example which you guys can quote in the answer. Thus, the issues with the hydropower generation. We have understood all of these issues through the use of map which you guys can draw. Now let's try to understand them word by word. First is climatic factor. Just look here. India's hydropower output actually records its steepest fall in nearly 4 decades. So the hydropower share in India's total power output actually fell to a record low of 8.3%. Why? Because many of the rivers in our country are not perennial in the nature. They also depend on large scale monsoon rainfall. Right now, today itself, there is an article where you guys can actually see the very less rainfall which we are getting in this year's season. Why? Because of the impact of El Nino. So we cannot be overtly reliant on this hydropower, because what if such climatic drought takes place? The flow of the river will get impacted. We will not be able to utilize the velocity of this river flow to actually, kind of generate kinetic energy from potential energy. Further, the extreme weather events which are taking place due to the climate change. So let's say, for example, there is a place called as Cherrapunji which you might have heard about, which is considered to be the place where the highest rainfall takes place in India. Do you people know that almost thanks to this event of climate change, 80% of rainfall which Cherrapunji receives today, 80% of that takes place only in the span of 20 days. So even if we have a dam, many of the time in these extreme weather events or in these cloudburst events, these dams actually become kind of insufficient to actually regulate the flow. So either they are required to release a large amount of flow without conducting or using it for the generation of electricity, or it actually leads to the large scale loss of life and property. Further, the clouds of climate change has led to what? Glacier melt and thawing of permafrost. So now let's add some data here to substantiate our answer. You people very clearly know that how the Hindu Kush Himalayas have actually warmed up by 2 degrees Celsius as per the IPCC report. If the global warming is taking place and the global temperature has increased by 1.45 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial level, in Hindu Kush Himalaya region this is more than 2 degrees Celsius. So Hindu Kush Himalayas are actually warming up twice faster in comparison to the other areas or the areas of the plain level. Don't you think that will lead to what? The thawing of the permafrost. So earlier, as per the study which was conducted by the ISRO, earlier the thermal temperature of the ice which used to exist in the Himalayan ecosystem, that used to be around -16 to -20 degrees Celsius. Now this thermal temperature has actually been brought down to -2 degrees Celsius. So more faster glacial retreat and permafrost thawing which will take place. That will lead to a kind of a large scale supply of water in the short term. But in the long run, the water supply is going to decline for our country. So don't you think this hydropower projects in long run after 20-30 years is actually going to have less output? Further, because of this issue of moraine dam failures, or for example these extreme weather events like cloudburst, or because of these glacial retreat and permafrost thawing which is taking place, don't you think it is compromising the stability of the mountain slopes where we are going to create these dams? The extreme weather events like cloudburst and avalanche. Thus, as per the TV Somnathan Committee of 2024, it actually said that such large-scale dam projects in the upper stretch of Himalayan rivers can actually lead to damage the sustainable ecology, and thus suggested that hydropower development beyond elevation of 2,200 meters in the Himalayan region is not sustainable for our country at all. Then even with this run of river projects, as we were discussing, the issues of long stretches of dewatered river channels. So what about the ecological dependency and economic dependency of the people around that stretch of the river? The loss of ecological and environmental flow which will take place, leading to what? Fragmentation of aquatic habitats, and the large-scale disruption of sediment transport which will take place. Thus, the Ravi Chopra Committee, which was actually created in the aftermath of the Kedarnath flood which took place, it provided a case study of Teesta 3 project, where it said that how this Teesta, which actually originates for Tasolamo Lake, flows from 150 km in Sikkim and then 123 km in West Bengal, ultimately reaching to the Bay of Bengal.
They identified the issue of loss of life and damage to property which has taken place because of these dam failures, because of erratic rainfall, unconsolidated sediment, and undulating terrain which exist. You guys can actually draw this map in your answer as well. Leading to what? Many of the time the local communities which live there, they have a very poor public perception of such large scale project, because it leads to what? Their rehabilitation, displacement of these local communities in that particular area. Many of the time it also leads to property dispute under Article 300A of the Constitution. Can any one of you tell me in the comment box which particular amendment act actually deprived the right to property as a fundamental right? So thus, in 1990, there were almost 47 projects which were proposed in the region of Arunachal Pradesh, hydropower projects. Do you know how many of them have been installed till now? Only 5. Why? Poor planning, weak environment assessment, ignoring the local realities which lead to huge human, environmental and financial cost. Thus, Ravi Chopra committee basically suggested that all of these idle sites which you are looking at the upper stretch of Himalayan rivers, they are actually disaster prone, because you know that how the Indian plate is consistently moving towards the European plate. So this entire Himalayan ecosystem belt itself is actually earthquake prone. They lies in the seismic zone of 4 and 5th. Any such small earthquake can actually kind of compromise the stability of the dam, leading to what? Large scale loss of life, aquatic ecosystem disruption, biodiversity loss, property loss. Even if you are relying on rainfall, just look here. 80% of Cherrapunji annual rainfall actually occurred in the last year in 120 hours because of the extreme weather events. As per the Ministry of Jal Shakti, such hydroelectric projects can actually alter the ecological flow, the downstream as well. Also, if you look at our population, don't you think our population is significantly increasing day by day? It is going to reach to 1.7 billion by the year of 2050 as per the United Nations World Population Report of 2024. So currently we are actually hosting almost 18% of the world population, but we have only 4% of the water reserves. We cannot deviate a significant portion of that only for the electricity generation. And this increasing water uses and wastage will actually lead to what? Further low reservoir levels in the future. But so now we are basically actually looking at the two sides of the swords, right? Try to understand this. First and foremost, we require this precious water for what? For our water security. You guys might be hearing about the issue of Bombay which it is facing. As per the report by Niti Aayog at that point of a time, 50% of districts in India could face severe water scarcity by 2050. India's rising water stress also have economic impact because it will actually dent our sovereign credit profile. Considering our country is among the country which is most vulnerable to water management risk and has the poorest access to basic services including water among the G20 economies. But if we are actually not going to create such large-scale hydropower project, what will be the impact of that? So our energy demand is also significantly increasing, and we are also facing huge amount of deficit when it comes to energy supply. So hydropower is actually a very important pillar of our energy security. Second, it is a renewable energy resource. So it will actually help us to achieve our Panchamrit target, to actually reduce our import dependency which it lies on crude oil and natural gas, to actually reduce our per capita carbon dioxide emission as well, if you guys can see. This is also the question which actually appeared in your prelims 2025 actually. So what are the steps which has been taken by the government? First and foremost, we are actually focusing on large hydropower projects, but not beyond 2200 meter elevation of the Himalayas. Okay? We are basically trying to create such large scale hydropower project, basically functioning on the idea of pumped storage hydropower. We can copy the model of China also here. There is nothing bad to actually learn from someone who is actually doing good. And we can launch such greater 25 megawatt projects in the lower streams of Himalayas. Second, the DISCOMs, distributing companies, they shall have a significant obligation that they will buy at least a certain share of their power which is being generated from the hydropower. That will further lead to the kind of a private investment in hydropower sector. Then the interstate transmission charges from any such electricity which is being generated from hydropower, they can be completely waived off. We can further promote such pumped storage projects by bringing more public-private partnership. and also provide budgetary support for the cost of enabling infrastructures in this particular region, like for example railways, transmissions lines, etc. All the important such projects which lies on rivers and has been in the news recently has been listed here for you. Take a screenshot for the prelims purpose. Try to attempt this particular question and we move forward to the next news. Whereas a lot of recent reports has actually highlighted that how large number of politicians have actually grabbed a lot of important land, that too in a very strategic area, obviously with future profit incentives and motives. This criminalization of politics which has taken place is actually become a very important issue. The context is that in the world's largest democracy, where the government should be rooted in integrity and public service, a disturbing reality looms large, and that is criminals are steadily occupying the corridors of power. And thus such headlines has actually become a common sight for us common people. So actually, to refer to this idea of criminalization of politics, let's refer to a report which has been released by the Association for Democratic Reforms, where you can actually use this data in your mains answer. You can write that how 31% of Rajya Sabha MPs have declared criminal cases against themselves. 16% have declared serious criminal cases like for example murder, attempted murder, kidnapping and crime against women. So these people who might have been involved in kidnapping are earlier going to bring a law to actually prevent such kidnapping, and thus irony dies its own death. 46% of more than 1,861 MLAs which exist in our country, they have criminal cases against them. So what are the ethical issues which are involved in that for your ethics section? First is lack of integrity itself. What is the value integrity actually entails? So let's say for example I am an honest person, but only unless and until there is no loss aspect or no loss ratio which I am looking at. The person who actually stick true to their core values, like for example if I am an honest person, but even if I am being pressurized by my senior officials, or even if something negative can happen to me, but yet I remain on the path of honesty and truth, then that particular value is called as integrity. In a very simpler terms, it can be reflected in the quote which was said by Swami Vivekananda, that I is watching myself. I am keeping an eye on me and my values. Don't you think that such politicians who basically act as the representative of the people in the biggest law-making temple of our country, that is Parliament, if they are not honest, or if they are indulged in any kind of criminal activity, it basically erodes public trust in the legitimacy of the government institutions itself. And that is the thing. When you look at the police, the first thought which comes in your mind is to bribe them. You never think that the police exists because of you or for your service. Second, it undermines the legal equality, where the powerful individuals are actually kept above the rule of law. The rule of law was basically brought to actually replace the idea of rule of thumb. Rule of thumb which was actually utilized by the earlier kings. The kings who had access to the large scale resources, where they could deploy various kind of peoples for their service. Even today, don't you think that the rule of law exists differently for different class of people? If you are rich enough, you can actually buy the rule of law for yourself, where even if your son ends up, let's say, driving car in a rashing manner and ends up hitting people, even will that person will be jailed and penalized for the crimes which he has committed, right? You know the answer for that. Then comes the lack of accountability, where it's obvious that if there is a person who has already been indulged in such crime and has ultimately lead to that position of power, don't you think that person will work only on the epithet of I, me and myself culture? Why that person will have an iota of interest in public welfare? Ultimately creating what? A conflict of interest between what? Misuse of public office for private gain. And these representative of the people, right? These representative of the people who have been elected to the temple of democracy, do you think they will act as a role model for the future? How many of you actually want to become politician to serve the country in the future? Any one of you? And if yes, please comment down what is the noble idea which you have for the country, for the future. So these are basically the issues which we are facing right now, right? I think there is a misplacement of the slide. We move to the causes of criminalization. The first cause is the deficit of rule of law. So why these politicians who are sitting there in the position of power, why they do not have any fear that what if their lie will get caught? What if they actually get penalized for the crime? Because of the large scale judicial pendency which actually prevails in our court system. These particular politicians will kept on getting tariq pe tariq, and the case will kept on going for 15 to 20 years, where they actually end up exploiting the principle of innocent until proven guilty, and thus completely reduce the deterrent effect of law. Where the parties, they also prioritize that instead of actually kind of nominating a honest candidate, they actually prioritize that candidate which has much more possibility of winning. So for example, if you are going to fight a Lok Sabha election, as per the Election Commission of India's guideline itself, the maximum expenditure which you people can have is 95 lakh rupees. How many of you have a total life saving of 95 lakh rupees till now? Just imagine, just to fight an election, you can invest legally up to 95 lakh rupees. Just think about the back channels which exist, the black money which is involved in these elections. The expenditure can go up to anywhere between 10 to 15 crore rupees. Do you have that much of money to fight the election in the most kind of a transparent manner? So basically the winnability factor lies with whom? Lies with the wealthy, the strong man, or the people who have access to illicit funds and networks. As per the Association for your Democratic Reforms, ADR itself, the candidate with criminal cases had much more higher winning probability of 15% rather than an ordinary candidate. Other socio-cultural factors also plays a role, where a lot of people actually vote for such people who are already indulged with such kind of activities because of the patron-client politics. Because if these people will get elected, that person will provide me some job, that person will actually protect me with some kind of disputes, or will provide me the property for which I am fighting for. Many of the people actually vote only on the line of caste, religion and ethnicity, and this is true for India as recent as of 2026. In the recently culminated the Legislative Assembly election of Bihar which took place, so there was a reporter who asked to this auntie that, are you going to vote upon the issue of caste? And she says absolutely yes. So he basically asked her, right, and I will quote, कि क्या आप विकास को वोट नहीं देंगी? To which auntie ji replied, विकास कौन सी जात का है? So basically the image of politics which exists in the mind of us common people has actually gone to such a level where we have started thinking that it is a kind of a forbidden pond which shall not be entered at all. However, keep this in mind that there are certain steps which has been taken to decriminalize the Indian politics as well. For example, in the Union of India versus ADR case of 2002, Supreme Court specifically mandated that politicians shall disclose the cases which are pending against them and all the assets and liabilities which they have. Also, under right to know, under Article 19 Clause 1, it actually increased the public scrutiny on the political parties and the candidates. Also, there is a creation of fast-track courts for cases against MLAs and MPs. Election Commission of India, following the principle under Article 324, also tries to impose model code of conduct and monitor the expenditure of these politicians. In Lily Thomas case of 2013, Supreme Court specifically held that there shall be an immediate disqualification of any such politician who has been elected to the temple of democracy if that person has been convicted. And that is regulated under Section 8 Clause 3 of the RPA Act of 1951, which provides for the disqualification of a person who is convicted of a criminal offense and sentenced to imprisonment for not less than 2 years. So such a person becomes disqualified from contesting election for a further period of 6 years from the date of release. Keep these important statements in your mind. And we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn some important facts about the Great Nicobar projects, this time specifically focusing upon the aspect on the prelims examination. What is the context of the news? So the chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee has actually sought a report from the Home Ministry on the Great Nicobar project, as the opposition has accused the government of imperiling the fragile Nicobar island ecosystem only for commercial purposes. Keep this in mind. Andaman and Nicobar is a very important union territory of India, very strategic, which comprises of 572 islands. Andaman and Nicobar are actually separated by a 10-degree channel. The capital and the largest city of this union territory is Port Blair, which has now been renamed as Sri Vijayapuram. And the Great Nicobar basically forms, as you can see, the southernmost tip of India here, which basically consists of your Indra Point. So this is your Andaman and this is your Nicobar, and they are separated from a 10-degree channel. Keep this in your mind. Take it. While the opposition is targeting the government that if you are going to create this large scale project, it is going to completely disrupt the biodiversity there, completely disrupt the tribal community. The government's argument is that only 84 square kilometer area we are taking, which falls under the tribal reserve, and it is going to impact only 1.8% of total forest area, so do not worry that much. If we refer to the geography of Great Nicobar, just look at this small tiny piece of island here. It consists of 19 islands, small islands, and a population of 8,000 plus people. What is the vegetation here? Evergreen rainforest, mangroves and pandan forest, where it is inhabited by two important particularly vulnerable tribal groups, which is Nicobaris and Shompen, where they are reliant on primary sector, like for example cultivation of coconuts, areca nuts, bananas, mangoes, etc. Keep this in mind that 85% of the area of Great Nicobar actually fall under a biosphere reserve, where it hosts important endemic species like for example giant leatherback turtle, Great Nicobar megapode, crab-eating macaque, or Nicobar tree shrew, where here exist extensive mangroves, coral reefs and seagrass beds, and thus they act as a major carbon sink and maintain the ecological balance also. What is this project? The Great Nicobar project, for which the government has basically sanctions more than 72,000 crore rupees. It has been piloted by Niti Aayog and a development agency called as ANITCO, where we are going to create a transshipment port at Galathea Bay, a dual-use international airport for both civil and military purpose, a 450 megawatt power plant, combining gas-based and solar power generation, as well as a township and a greenfield city. As per the Ministry of Environment itself, there will take place a diversion of approximately 130 km square, for which approximately 8.5 lakh trees will be, kind of fell down. 88 crore rupees has been earmarked for wildlife conservation and a special medical unit, leading to the destruction of 648 species of flora and 330 species of fauna, as per the newspaper article, that is Times of India, including Nicobar's wild pig, tree shrew, Great Nicobar crested serpent eagle. It will have a threat to the Shompen tribe, which is a hunter-gatherer nomadic community, as well as the giant leatherback turtle, act as a threat to coral and marine ecosystem as well, where as per the Geological Survey of India, here exist 117 species of your Selectranian corals in Galathea. Or it will act as a threat to the dugong as well, considered as the sea cow, because of the loss of seagrass meadows. So these are important environmental challenges. This is the project. This is the geography of Andaman and Nicobar. Keep all of these factors very dear to you from the perspective of prelims, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn about some recent amendments which has been brought to the Right to Information Act of 2005. What is the context of the news? So very famous activist, Anna Hazare ji, he has basically said or has given an ultimatum to the Maharashtra government that to withdraw the Maharashtra Right to Information Rules 2026. Otherwise, he is going to launch a hunger strike and a nationwide agitation if the changes are not scrapped. Where Anna Hazare is considered to be a very ardent follower of the Gandhian's method of agitation and protest. In this context, can any one of you tell me in which particular movement Gandhi actually went on a hunger strike for the first time? So what are these changes which has been brought by the Maharashtra government? First and foremost is a threefold increase in the application fees, in the introduction of a new fees for appeals, a cap on the free information which will be actually be provided to those people who are coming from below poverty lines, and ultimately the rules also require that each RTI application shall pertain to a single subject and shall be limited to 150 words. So for example, if you are going to ask for some information, very sensitive information, now you are required to be very precise there also. Write a 2-page document. You cannot go beyond one word that they will not give you the information. Take the things which the governments do to actually, just kind of curb down any level of transparency. Same thing happened with the Section 44 Clause 3 of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023 itself. So basically what happened that in the K.S. Puttaswamy judgment, Supreme Court held that right to privacy is an integral part of fundamental right. ठीक है? Our government said, "Arey, what a nice thing you have said. It's a right to, very important right to privacy." So what if under, let's say, right to information, you want a very sensitive information against any politician or against any bureaucrat? Anything can be classified as a personal information, correct? So let's say, for example, on that particular day where this officer was, why he was not present on the duty, you cannot ask that. It's a personal information. And thus they actually amended the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, specifically brought a section there which amends the Section 8 Clause 1 of RTI Act and provides a blanket exemption to any such information which they will consider to be personal in the nature, thus significantly increasing the ambit of information that can be refused by the government. Central government can also exempt any government or private sector entity by merely issuing a notification itself. Your NGOs, research organizations, and opposition parties, they have to comply with the stringent obligation of the data fiduciary. Even the data protection board which has been created, it has been not provided any autonomy. So don't you think even these provisions shall be taken by Anna Hazare to actually protest against? In this context, just remember the salient provisions of the RTI Act from the perspective of prelims. First and foremost, in Raj Narayan versus UP government, the Supreme Court held that right to information is a fundamental right under Article 19 of the Constitution. And thus there shall be a right to secure access to information which shall be provided from the public authorities. Who are public authorities in this context? All authorities or bodies which are established under the constitution, so the constitutional bodies. Any body which is owned, controlled or substantially financed by either central or state government. Even if there exists any NGO which is substantially financed directly or indirectly by the central or the state government, even that falls within the ambit of the public authority. Ultimately, any such public authority will be governed by the Department of Personnel and Training under the Ministry of Personnel. And it also led to the creation of Central and State Public Information Officer, who is required under Section 4 to have a suo motu disclosure of any kind of information. If you go to this public information officer and ask for any information, then that information shall be given within 30 days. But if your issue requires a matter which is concerning the right to life and liberty, then such information has to be passed within 48 hours. So if 48 hours have passed, or in normal circumstances 30 days have passed, and no information has been provided to you, then you can actually appeal against the decision of this public information officer if the information is denied. ठीक है? To the State Information Commissioner or the Central Information Commissioner. Keep this in your mind. ठीक है? Remember these important amendment as well, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn some very salient provisions of the SHANTI Act of 2025, which has been in the news today. Why? Because a private company is actually eyeing 10 gigawatt nuclear power plant, right, to actually generate much more nuclear energy for the future, which is obviously very good for our country. So just look here. SHANTI Act, which was passed last year, is actually expected to usher in the private participation across nuclear activities such as power generation, reactor supply, etc. Where Adani Power is implementing India's largest ever private sector capital expenditure program of over 2 lakh crore, aiming to reach 45 gigawatt of nuclear power capacity in the next 5 years. So SHANTI Act, under that, the government has basically set for ourselves a very ambitious target that we are going to generate 100 gigawatt of nuclear power energy by the year of 2047. What is our current status or the current share of nuclear power energy in India's total energy mix? That is 8.8 gigawatt. Now let's try to understand how the SHANTI Act basically kind of rationalize the nuclear power sector. So first and foremost, it empowers the central government to formulate national nuclear energy policy. It also allows the private companies to actually apply for nuclear licenses. So thus, the monopoly which existed of the public entities in the nuclear power generation, now that has been ended by this Shanti Act. But there are certain areas which are still entirely reserved for the government. For example, any enrichment of nuclear fuel where it can actually goes into the nuclear fission exercise and can be considered as the weapon graded uranium, that can only be done by the government, as well as any kind of heavy water production that remains entirely under the sovereign control. Then certain areas the government will put a very strict inspection upon, like for example source material and fissile material, they remain under the central government surveillance. Also, you are not required to bring, let's say for example, purchase multiple licenses for various kind of nuclear activities, so a single composite license can be used for that. Now, let's say for example, if Adani company sets up a nuclear power plant and any incident like Chernobyl nuclear disaster takes place, then the company will be held liable, and any small incident of any magnitude, it will have a minimum penalty of $300 million. Keep this in mind. So thus government has created a nuclear liability fund. So yes, the private entities can generate nuclear energy, but they are also responsible for any such incident or accidents. ये clear है. Currently, these are important public nuclear power plants which exist in our country, owned by the government or run by the government. Naroda in Uttar Pradesh, right? Your Kakrapar in the region of Gujarat, Tarapur in Maharashtra, Kaiga in Karnataka, Kundankulam in Tamil Nadu. Now, when we talk about the three-stage nuclear power program which we have, very simply understand this. We have some sources of uranium in our country, like for example, Jadugoda in Jharkhand, or for example, Tumlapeli in Andhra Pradesh, Lambapur in Telangana, Rohil mine in Rajasthan, or Damasiat or Wakhin in Meghalaya. So basically, there exist two types of nuclear fuel. One is fissile, one is fertile. Fissile nuclear fuel or fissile isotopes, they can be directly used as a fuel, like for example uranium-233, 235, plutonium-239. But fertile nuclear fuel first needs to be converted into fissile, like uranium-238, thorium-232. Okay? So first and foremost, the first stage of our nuclear program is basically pressurized heavy water reactor, where we use what? Natural uranium, that is uranium-235. 7 kg of that, and 993 kg of uranium-238. Keep this in mind, uranium-235 is a fissile nuclear fuel. 238 first shall be converted into this and then shall be utilized. We are using both of them, 0.7% of uranium-235 and 0.93% approximately of uranium-238. This will lead to a nuclear fission reactor, where we'll use a heavy water, DTO, deuterium oxide, which is used as both moderator and coolant. 22 such nuclear reactors currently work under this pressurized heavy water reactor. So here the uranium-238, which is basically a fertile nuclear fuel, it ends up absorbing neutron and turns into plutonium-239, which now look here is a fissile nuclear fuel. We use this plutonium-239 in the second stage in the fast breeder reactor, where this blanket of uranium-238 is actually bombarded with neutron, converting it into plutonium-239, and that leads to a self-sustaining chain reaction. Here the coolant, unlike here which was heavy water, here we use liquid sodium. Ultimately, the plan is to use thorium, for which we have vast amount of reserves, to produce uranium-233, which itself again, as you guys can see, is a fissile material and thus can undergo nuclear fission to create self-sustaining chain reaction. Here we are going to use light water. So just remember, heavy water, liquid sodium and ultimately light water. These are basically the coolants which we use in the three stages. And we move forward to the last news of the day, where we'll try to understand what is driving Europe's heat wave. Is it severe? The answer is yes. First, try to understand the description of Europe right now. Around 50 people has been dead, schools shut, public transports interrupted, air-conditioned cinema halls and museums asked to shelter the young and elderly for free, farmers harvesting their crop at night. This is not happening in the Marathwada region of Maharashtra right now. This is happening in the Western Europe, which is reeling under a severe heat wave. So with countries from Netherlands to UK and Italy to France has been affected. In France, 40 people actually drowned over the past week because they went swimming in the unsupervised water just to cool themselves down. The country recorded its hottest day on Tuesday, recording a maximum temperature of 44 degrees Celsius. Italy and UK have also issued extreme heat alerts. In the same 45 degrees, there are 90% of informal sector of workers in our country, like for example, the people who might be going to deliver your food by the Zomato even today. ठीक है? These people are unable to bear it. Why it has happened? Because of something which is called as omega block. What is omega block? It is a large weather pattern shaped like a Greek letter omega, which basically ends up trapping hot air over a region, leading to the prolonged heat wave and dry condition. कैसे बनता है वो देखते हैं. So normally you people are already well aware about this concept of jet streams, which are basically kind of a very fast moving current in the upper troposphere. So normally this jet stream, they move from west to east, moving the weather systems along with them. Sometimes the jet streams actually becomes a little bit wavy and develops large bends, as you guys can see. So basically a high pressure area actually builds in the region over the region. So let's say for example, normally what shall happen that on the ground level there shall be a low pressure area. So the air will converge here, will start rising, and a high pressure area will be created here. So the warm air will keep on colliding with each other, keep on rising, and the high pressure will keep on creating here. Over a period of time, what if the temperature at the high pressure divergent area and the convergent area is equally hot and thus equally same? Don't you think that now there is a trap of this hot air which will be created here? This blocks the usual flow, trapping the warm air beneath it, and the pattern can actually persist for days or weeks. So this basically high pressure acts like a lid, trapping the warm air near the surface, and thus the sinking air prevents any kind of cloud formation and rainfall. This trapped air heats up further, leading to extreme temperature, extreme heat, dry condition, health risks like for example exhaustion, heat strokes, and higher risk for vulnerable people, disrupt your transport, school closures, strain on power and health system. So remember this omega block from the perspective of prelims, even if they ask it as a term, that what it relates with as recently seen in the news. And with this we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.